Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session, Tools and Resources for TK-12 School Leaders to Become Climate Ready. All of the tools that we're going to be sharing today around climate preparedness and climate readiness were developed in partnership between three organizations, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, 10 Strands, and Undaunted K-12. So just some quick introductions to all of us presenters.
Hi, I'm Angie Goyen. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at 10 Strands.
Hi, I'm Ingrid Roberson. I'm a senior advisor over at the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence.
I'm Stephanie Seidman. I'm the program director at Undaunted K-12.
And I'm Sarah Whiting. I'm the Director of Data Science and Client Engagement at 10 Strands.
And by the end of the session today, we hope that you will understand how climate impacts affect schools and that you are able to learn from districts who are leading on resilience and even starting to look into your own data.
Great, thank you for that, Stephanie. So again, Ingrid Roberson, I'm with the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, and I'm going to focus just for a few minutes on the role of state agencies in supporting climate resilience. This is an incredible priority and a growing priority, and state agencies do need to be involved. So next slide. Thank you. And so in terms of the California context, just so you know, there's three state agencies. We have our State Board of Education, we have the California Department of Education, and then there's us, the CCEE. And really, we're charged with advising and assisting local education agencies. So these are school districts, charter schools, as well as county offices of education. In the next slide, what you'll see is that we're really meant to be a statewide leader. Our mission is really to deliver on our promise for our students. That's a quality, equitable education. We design and implement initiatives, and we really try to share lessons learned from actual school districts, charter schools, as well as county offices of education. And so what you'll see is that we use two vehicles, as you go to the next slide, around sharing those lessons learned. We have our open doors, which are these webinars on a host of topics, academic, school climate, and now climate resilience, as well as what we call our CCEE spotlights. These are written newsletter case study styles where you can even go more in depth on LEAs that we spotlight in terms of their practices. Especially here, what we're highlighting as you go to the next one are LEAs and what they've done around climate adaptation. And so you can see what we've already held together in terms of open doors, spotlights, and our forthcoming summary report and toolkit. I just have to say, it's been great to partner with 10 Strands as well as Undaunted K-12. I think as a state agency, we are recognizing that we can keep talking about chronic absenteeism, but we're not talking about those root causes of which climate is a big part of. And that's where we realize that we really need to start highlighting, championing all that we can around this area. And so bringing in these two partners who really understand the context, the strategies, and what's emerging across the state of California, that we want to really be able to highlight those research-based practices.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ingrid, for that overview. And thank you for your partnership on this. It's been wonderful to work with you, and we're really excited to share these stories out into the field. And so, Stephanie, if you go ahead and go to the next slide, I'm just going to do a quick overview to why, Ingrid already previewed this a little bit, this idea of the connection to absenteeism, but I'm going to just do a very high level introduction to the climate crisis and some of the impacts for schools. So our series is focusing on this because the climate crisis is such a big existential crisis for all of society. And in particular, schools have some pretty serious impacts. So just to give everybody the same foundation, this climate change report done by the IPCC was released in 2021 and had three key findings. So the first is that global warming is unequivocally caused by humans, that the impact of the climate crisis is already here, and it's disproportionately impacting low-income, Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, and that temperatures have increased already since 1880, and that they will continue to do so in the next 20 years just due to the emissions from the past decades. So I know that we definitely have this call to action to mitigate climate change as soon as possible, to not allow it to increase any more than that 1.5 mark. And at the same time, because we know that we have those emissions that are still there and they're trapped and we're not able to pull them out of the atmosphere as fast as we'd like to, that we're going to need to adapt to these climate impacts. So if you go to the next slide, when we're talking about schools, the climate impacts that we are most vulnerable to in schools are things like high heat, extreme precipitation, air quality issues due to high heat or wildfire smoke, of course, wildfires, which have caused the most school closure days in California in the last few years. And then we are also seeing drought and sea level rise, on these polar opposites here, really affecting our communities. And we, Andante K-12 and 10 Strands co-wrote a report that was released in spring 2023 with Stanford and UC Berkeley to really dive deeper into this and show how these climate impacts are really threatening the physical and mental health of our student and staff, how it's contributing to that lost learning time and that absenteeism, and that it's projected to increase in frequency and intensity, and therefore we really need to take action. And so the series that we did together with CCEE this time was to really find the stories from the field of how people are being impacted by this, and to really bring those stories to light, and then also to share some of the best practices that people are putting into place in order to do this adaptation and to try to also do simultaneous mitigation. So go to the next slide, please. And what I'll say is that what you're about to hear from Stephanie and Sarah is a quick run through of 4 different climate impacts. So high heat, wildfires, extreme precipitation, and sea level rise. And they're going to share a little bit of the data. They're going to share a little bit of the stories from the field. And then we're going to point you to that website that's there so you can go way more in depth. And that website will keep popping up. But if you want to take a quick screenshot and then type it in, you're welcome to do that. And before they go into their segment, I do just want to say, it is really important when you think about these climate impacts to have in mind that every county usually has multiple biomes and different topographies across any given county. So it'll be really important to think about, like, okay, in my county, if I have mountain areas, but also urban areas, and maybe also a little bit of like coastal or desert parts, like these different things, extreme precipitation or high heat is going to feel different for the different members of my county. And so school districts who are located in one spot might feel something differently than other school districts. And you'll hear in some of our open doors and you'll see in some of our articles, like you'll hear county people saying just that, like, we thought it was just rain, but then the rain for this district was way more intense than the rain for that district. So anyway, I'll let Sarah and Stephanie go more in depth on this, but just keep that in mind as you look at it. All right, Stephanie, over to you for high heat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andra. That was a really good primer on why it is so important that we are thinking about emergency preparedness and climate resilience for our schools, because we know that these impacts are really affecting our schools and our students. So starting with high heat, I just want to kind of say high level that children are particularly vulnerable to the health impacts of extreme heat. So whether that's heat exhaustion, which can include headaches or dehydration, nosebleeds, sometimes even vomiting or stroke, young people are particularly vulnerable. And then there's a whole body of research that shows that students just don't learn as well in hot classrooms. In fact, 5% of the gap in test scores between Black and Latino students and their white counterparts can actually be attributed to disproportionate exposure to hot classrooms. And low-income schools and schools that serve more students of color are actually less likely to have air conditioning. And then hot classrooms without air conditioning are linked to increasing student absenteeism, which we were just kind of talking about, and even increased disciplinary referrals. In addition to the indoor extreme heat, outdoor extreme heat is a huge problem, affecting after school sports and recess and physical education, which can all be really dangerous on hot days. And most schools lack adequate shade, and particularly schools in low-income communities lack access to shade, which is the most effective solution in making our outdoor spaces cooler.
Here we can see a little bit about the data projections for high heat in the next few decades. And we can see that by 2055, we will have over 2 million students affected by 120 or more high heat days per year. So this is a significant amount, even above what would be happening during summer vacation. So it is imperative that schools start to think through how to protect students who are on campus from these high heat days. We can see that these are the number of days above 87 degrees. This number was selected because it is a number within the new California heat protections. And it's also on the cusp between caution and extreme caution on the National Weather Service's heat index, dependent on relative humidity. And while there are some counties that will not see days above their height, above 87 degrees, we will see all counties having days above their heat threshold. And those counties that have lower heat thresholds and tend to be cooler are often not equipped to provide cool classrooms and shade for their students, since it's not something that they've historically had to deal with.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. So the purpose of this project, this collaborative project between CCE, 10 Strands, and Undaunted K-12, is to share solutions from school districts and County Office of Education who are leading the way on making really meaningful impact in addressing some of these climate issues. So one of the resources or artifacts from this collaborative project is a open door webinar around mitigating outdoor extreme heat and how schoolyard greening is critical for resilience. And this webinar featured really amazing presenters from Green Schoolyards America, which is an NGO that helps schools really address outdoor extreme heat through schoolyard greening, as well as Pasadena Unified School District and Long Beach Unified School District, who are two school districts who are really leading the way and innovating in this arena. So I just wanted to, this is the website for where you can find more information with this, where you can find this open door webinar. And then you can also see that there's other tons of great resources and links for you available there. And I also just wanted to give a little bit of a teaser for what you might be able to expect when you take a look at this webinar with all these great solutions.
So what is the solution? The solution is schoolyard forests, and they are scalable, nature-based solutions that protect vulnerable children from the impacts of climate change. We think about schoolyard forests as being in the context of a living schoolyard or green schoolyard, green schoolyard in that context. Next slide, please. So what are schoolyard forests? Simply defined, they are clusters of trees within a green schoolyard, planted in places that children regularly access during the school day. So I always say, think about where children eating lunch, where they able to have recess. This is where you want to plant the trees and ensure that there's adequate shade for the students that are accessing that space. Next slide, please. So this work is part of the National Schoolyard Forest System. California is the first state to participate in the National Schoolyard Forest System. And as a statewide initiative that was developed in partnership with 10 Strands, as Andrew mentioned earlier, California Department of Education, and the California Department of Forestry and Fire, also known as CAL FIRE, and Green Schoolyards America, we developed the California Schoolyard Forest System, which is an initiative to increase tree canopy on public school grounds. We're really aiming for 30% tree canopy or child accessible tree canopy where students are on each school ground to protect them from extreme heat and rising temperatures. Next slide, please.
Okay, so that's just a little bit of a teaser of the amazing wealth of knowledge and resources that you can find in the toolkit and from all of the artifacts from this project. And so we are going to move to talking next about wildfires, smoke, public power shutoffs, and grid instability. And so again, just wildfires are directly impacting student health and learning. Wildfire smoke is 10 times more toxic to children than other forms of air pollution. And a recent study from Stanford actually found that pollution from wildfires is linked to lower test scores and even lower future earnings for kids who grow up with more smoke days. And then since the state rather began collecting data in 2003, wildfires have accounted for 2/3 of our school closures since 2018. So I think Andrew mentioned that as well. And these closures obviously disrupt student schooling and also just impede access to education. And then because of wildfires, we are seeing an increase in grid instability with public safety power shutoffs that threaten electricity, internet, food safety, and other critical services for our schools. So now having a stable grid is also something that schools must contend with and find solutions for, in addition to all the other things that schools are doing.
So we can see that wildfire risk varies somewhat from county to county, but all counties across the state of California will either be directly impacted by wildfires, will be impacted by wildfire smoke, or will be impacted by displacement of students from those areas of high wildfire risk. We can also see that over 4 million students are within those high wildfire risk areas, and that the amount of area that is likely to burn will be changing from year to year and increasing in the case of 25 counties.
So even though this data is really scary, we have stories from the field to help you think about solutions for your area and leading districts and county offices of education who are really making meaningful change towards wildfire resilience. So really encourage you to check out our open door webinar called Preparing for a New Normal, Climate Emergencies and Their Impacts on Schools. And this was the first kind of kickoff webinar because it featured the emergency services team from the California Department of Education. And then it also featured leaders from county offices of education who are thinking about emergency preparedness and resilience in really new and innovative ways. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. Another thing that I encourage you to check out, especially if grid resilience is one of the issues that your school or district might be dealing with, is the spotlight on Santa Barbara Unified School District, who created a microgrid. They created a microgrid that it's a solar and storage microgrid that can power their entire school district indefinitely in case of grid outages or other kind of lasting outages from wildfires, from mudslides, from public safety power shutoffs, and from other kind of extreme weather events. So again, just wanted to share a little bit of a teaser to get you excited about some of these resources. In addition to spotlighting Santa Barbara and this amazing project that they did, we also did an open door webinar all about grid resilience and grid stability, featuring Santa Barbara Unified School District, but also featuring Yolo County Office of Education and Modesto City Schools, all three of whom are really leading the way here. So this is a quick clip from Santa Barbara Unified School District.
Welcome to our open door on energy and grid.
Sorry. And there's Ingrid, and of course she's back with us today. Thank you, Ingrid.
Like this can happen, but a matter of when. Next slide, please. So Santa Barbara Unified School sites have served as emergency shelters during natural disasters. This was the case during the Thomas Fire of 2017, the subsequent mudslides in January of 2018, and the flooding that occurred in January of 2023 as well as 2024. So pictured here is our freeway going southbound from Santa Barbara that flooded in 2018 as well as 2023. When this freeway shuts down, it effectively cuts us off or severely delays us from getting most of our supplies as they come from neighboring counties from the south. Therefore, we needed something that would better position our district to assist the students, their families, and the community with the increasing frequency of disasters from climate change.
Okay, so again, really encourage you to take a look at the open door on energy and grid resilience.
At this point, we encourage you to pause the video, explore the data on the website, and think about what thoughts, questions, or epiphanies are coming up for you as you look through the high heat and wildfire data within the website.
Thank you, Sarah.
So next we're going to launch into extreme precipitation, thinking about flooding, stormwater management, and grid instability. And you can see from our data that the majority of counties will be impacted in some way or another, but that it's very variable from year to year. And extreme precipitation is difficult to predict. So there isn't going to be a time where there's a turning point and all of a sudden now you can start planning. It's better to start planning today because the amount of rainfall can vary wildly from year to year, depending on what region you're in. Topography and biome is also very important to take into account when thinking about extreme precipitation, since those desert, urban, and mountainous regions tend to see greater impacts with smaller amounts of rain due to the way that the water moves within those areas. Next slide.
All right, so stories from the field. We have a couple of resources from this project to share with you to help you think about how to improve resilience to flooding, stormwater management, and again, some of this grid instability. So again, I'm going to direct you to this open door on preparing for a new normal. And in terms of flooding, stormwater preparedness, and grid resilience, I especially encourage you to take a look at the section featuring Tim Ware. He's the School Safety and Security Services Coordinator at San Diego County Office of Education, who, if you may not remember, in February of this past year, 2024, experienced historic flooding in their schools that they had never seen before. And Tim talks about in this webinar, he shares so many excellent resources and so much good advice and wisdom for how to really prepare yourself so that you can act in a moment's notice, because that's really what they had to do. And then I also want to direct you to our spotlight on stormwater management featuring San Carlos School District. And San Carlos School District partnered with this awesome nonprofit called Flows to Bay to mitigate and prepare for stormwater-based flooding. So just wanted to kind of preview what that looks like. There are some excellent videos here. There's an excellent video about really overviewing what they did. And then there's also some photos of their projects, and really you can learn all about what they did so that it can inspire you to take action in your specific school or district. And then there's some resources as well. And then, of course, wanted to share a little teaser of this exciting project with you.
As sort of the different ways that schools can start to play a role. One is in-class curriculum, so actually incorporating what we're talking about in terms of the water cycle and climate change impacts and what to do about it. That can all become curriculum for eco-literacy, which is great. And you can make it standards aligned, and it works really well for schools. You can start to think about greening schoolyards to respond to climate change and increase resiliency. So that's what the whole vision is really about. What can schools actually do to protect their students? You know, children are probably the most at risk in terms of heat impacts and other things. They're our most vulnerable community in that sense. And so how can we transform schools to improve resiliency? And then within the broader community, thinking about safe routes to school, we know that we want to mitigate climate change. We want to get folks out of their cars to the extent possible, walking and biking to school. And green infrastructure can actually be a great way to improve safe routes to school with pictures like I showed with the Sustainable Street or Green Street project. So we're going to show some examples like that. And then regional stormwater capture projects. Schools, in a nutshell, schools have parking lots and schools have fields, playing fields. And those are both really great opportunities to capture and store water underground in those large underground stormwater capture basins, and begin to think about recharging groundwater for water supply for our communities, think about reducing flooding from creeks where they may be more susceptible to overtopping during large storms, and creating an on-site water supply for schools. And you may get a new field, which is great as well for students. So we'll talk a little bit about these things.
All right. So those are some of the exciting things that you can look forward to as you take a look at our artifacts from this project. And now we're going to move to our last one, which is sea level rise. And sea level rise really impacts our coastal communities more than our inland communities, of course. And school districts, of course, sea level rise is a longer term concern because it's happening now, it's happening already, but the water might not necessarily recede. And we're seeing this already in the Bay Area. KQED recently did some excellent reporting about schools in the Bay Area who are already facing sea level rise challenges and kind of permanent flooding, and what they might be able to do about it.
And as Stephanie said, while it's mostly coastal communities who will be impacted by sea level rise, this accounts for a little over half of the students within the state of California due to population density within these areas. Also, adjacent areas will be impacted as schools have to close due to erosion and flooding as sea level issues become more severe.
All right, so stories from the field. Again, I'm going to encourage you to take a look at this, Preparing for a New Normal Open Door. And this time, I really encourage you to focus on San Mateo County Office of Education. Superintendent of Schools Nancy McGee gave an excellent talk about how they are thinking about all kinds of climate impacts really from an emergency preparedness lens. And because San Mateo is a coastal community, one of the big impacts that they're thinking about is sea level rise. And so she has some great frameworks in there for thinking about sea level rise in terms of emergency preparedness.
And here's another moment where we would encourage you to pause the video, go explore the data, maybe look at your own region and see what those projections are like, and take a moment to think about how this information is landing for you. Are you feeling anxious about the impacts or hopeful about the different solutions that school districts are already starting to implement?
All right, great. Well, thank you, Stephanie and Sarah, for taking us through that. I know for myself, I mean, what I'm going to talk about next is about curriculum, but it's also about just the trauma of all this. Like, we're talking about emergencies and we're talking about communities really, really struggling with some very serious impacts. And so we just wanted to end this with a couple of different resources of how educators might think about teaching about this in curriculum and instruction, and also bringing in trauma-informed practices. So next slide. First, I just wanted to say that there is a policy foundation for these curriculum connections. So in the integration of environmental literacy and now climate literacy as well is built into education code, standards, frameworks, guidelines. And that's been happening really since the 1950s with Ed Code, but then closer into the 2000s was this attention to having environmental principles and concepts embedded into our standards and frameworks. Then as you kind of make your way into the 2010s, we saw an awards program for recognizing schools that are doing active work to mitigate climate change, but and environmental sustainability, but also to be teaching about it in the curriculum. And then we have our blueprint for environmental literacy, which is a roadmap for our state that was written in 2014 and released in 2015 by the California Department of Ed, really laying out how we need all of our students to graduate environmentally literate to help mitigate this crisis that we've been talking about, but also to really understand the impacts of it and how to be solutionaries in their communities. And then most recently, just last year, legislation, actually just this year, but this last legislative cycle, AB 285 was passed, which is a focus on climate science education, specifically in science instruction for grades 1 through 12. And you can see in this little image that there's a specific call out in there to be talking about adaptation. So all the issues we were just talking about, high heat, wildfire, storms, flooding, sea level rise, that children would be educated about that and in a way that's trauma informed, so that they're learning about the problem, but also getting experiences to deal with the solutions and also to grapple with the emotions of all of this. So just to say that there's a policy foundation for doing it, and that's there. And if you want to explore any more about that policy, there's a link there at the bottom. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So 10 Strands has partnered with the San Mateo County Office of Ed to take in a $6 million investment from the state to build out climate change and environmental justice curriculum that will do just what I mentioned in that AB 285, which is to say, let's educate our kids about climate change and environmental justice and climate impacts and help them go from knowledge to action in this really solutionary project-based learning way. So this curriculum is being currently field tested, and it will be available to everybody in 2025-26. And it's model curriculum. So it's a 3-week instructional unit at every grade level, K through 12, and really touching on climate change and environmental justice. And again, you'll see concepts and topics about some of the issues that we looked at all the way through this curriculum. And then last slide here for this section. Just wanted to share that there's a lot of work that folks are just at the start. We're really at the start of this field, I would say, for education of understanding climate impacts and trauma and the things that we need to do in our schools to make sure that we're linking climate and environmental trauma with already existing or now getting started trauma-informed practices. So there's a wealth of resources that you can find on this website here. But just to preview it a little bit, I'll say we know a lot about adverse childhood effects for individual children. We've learned a lot about that over the years. We've started to realize in the last 20 to 30 years that there's also these community impacts, and a lot of those actually are environmental injustice issues. And we're just now in the last few years starting to understand the collective trauma that people are feeling from climate impacts. And that can be from witnessing it or experiencing it. So when you've heard all those different stories of folks dealing with high heat or wildfire or the storms and the flooding coming through communities, if the students and the teachers, the faculty, staff, the people who are in that community, they're going to need a lot of support in terms of understanding the trauma and stress that they've gone through, feeling safe, having compassion for the issues that they've just experienced. And in fact, if you're in a neighboring community or if you're in a community that has a similar topography or a similar biome and you're hearing about it in other school communities, that's the witnessing part. And so that piece of thinking about how do we make sure that other folks feel empowered, that they can do something, or that they feel safe and they know how to predict the season of some of these things. That's all going to be really important for schools to start building into not only their curriculum and instruction practices and into their planning, but also into just the broader community and cultural school climate efforts as well, so that they can really think about how can we make sure that this is one piece of this bigger puzzle that we're trying to do with social and emotional learning, curriculum and instruction, behavior management, and emergency response. So tons of resources there if you want to get started on that. And I think that brings us to closing this out. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, so our closing thought for you as you're watching this video is to just pause, take a moment to reflect what resonated with you, what questions might you have that you want to explore further, or what content might you want to explore further. And then thinking about how do you want to commit to taking action for yourself and for your school communities? Because really, ultimately, our hope is that the school communities that you serve will adopt this climate ready mindset for emergency planning, but also in regards to just planning for all aspects of school life, like I just mentioned, campus, curriculum, community, and culture. So I think that's it for us. Thank you so much for watching our video, for recognizing this important topic. Please don't hesitate to follow up if you have any questions or you need any support with bringing climate adaptation to the schools that you serve. And thank you again to CCEE for your partnership this year. It's been wonderful working with you and bringing these important topics to our school communities.